Welcome to the webinar on the overview of metering assurance in the capacity market. My name is Ian Nichol and I work for EMR Settlements. You will have the opportunity to submit questions live during the webinar. We will endeavour to answer those during the next hour. Where we don't have a chance to address those questions, we will get back to you after the webinar. This is what we're going to cover today. I am going to give a brief overview of roles and responsibilities, which will not be going into great detail on the capacity market, as this is purely focusing on metering assurance. Then Tushar Singh from the delivery body will speak about metering assessments. We will have a break for questions, where we will try and answer any common questions that have been submitted during the previous presentations. And then my colleague Joy Yamani will talk about a metering test overview, and then I will talk about metering statements. We'll have another break for questions, and then we will move on to the metering tests, the desk-based exercise, and then Matthew Johnson from the Electricity Settlement Company will talk about timelines and further information, and there will be another opportunity to address any questions. The roles and responsibilities in the capacity market are that the delivery body look after the auctions and the metering assessment process. ESC are responsible for the settlement activity in the capacity market and the metering assurance. They have outsourced that to EMR Settlements Limited, who act as a service provider on their behalf. The delivery body looks after the metering assessments. Should you then require a metering statement, EMRS on behalf of ESC will deal with metering statements, the desk-based metering test, and the issuing of metering test certificates. We will also look after the site audit, but as this is an activity that takes place after the metering test certificate is issued, we will not be discussing it during this webinar. Just a quick reminder of metering configuration solutions that are currently allowed in the capacity market. You can use balancing mechanism units, supplier settlement metering, existing balancing services where they are store, FFR or FCDM, and bespoke metering. Depending on what metering option you are using, you will have a set of governing documents in addition to the rules that you must be compliant with, and the method that you will submit data to EMRS will also be dependent on the metering option you have chosen. I will now pass you on to Tushar, who is going to talk about the metering assessments.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tushar Singh, and I work as Capacity Market Account Manager in the Capacity Market team for the delivery body. Today I will cover metering assessments, various deadlines associated with different types of CMUs and auctions, and most importantly, which are the key metering assessment questions that determine whether an applicant requires to perform a metering test or not. So coming on to the next slide, what's a metering assessment? So it is a set of questions that's defined in the capacity market rules, and this set of questions cover various aspects of metering arrangements for the CMU on site. The answers to these questions help determine the delivery body to determine whether a metering test is required for the CMU. The metering assessment questions can be different for different CMU types depending on whether they are DSR, non-DSR, transmission distribution, CMRS, non-CMRS. For 2014 T-4 auction, the metering assessments can be completed using an offline tool which is available on our website, and it can be completed online for the rest of the auctions using the EMR portal. We have just released a process guidance, and the link to that guidance document is also included in this slide pack. So one more thing to be mindful of regarding the metering assessments, along with the metering assessments, the single line diagrams should also be provided within the same timescales. And Briefly going through the process flow regarding the metering assessment process. So the applicant submits completed metering assessments either offline or online. The delivery body, after receiving these metering assessments, determines whether a metering test is required. Thereafter, the delivery body informs the applicants and the settlements body and also update the relevant registers. Now, the next set of slides just covers the various timelines associated with all different types of CMUs and for different categories of auctions. One thing to note is that the metering assessments need to be completed only by the applicants who have deferred their metering assessments at the time of pre-qualification. I have also included the rule references for all these deadlines in case you need to go and have a further look and have more details around it. The gray text on the slide actually represents the metering assessment deadlines which have already passed. So this next slide covers all the auctions for which the pre-qualification took place in 2016. As you may notice, there are quite a few deadlines for this year, but the most important deadline is for the early auction, the CMU categories existing generating an interconnector and proven DSR CMUs, which need to complete their metering assessments by the 3rd of March 2017. There are a couple of things to bear in mind. After the metering assessment has been submitted to the delivery body may determine, when it determines whether a metering test is required or not, we would get back to you, and a metering test might be required. So you need to factor in that time required to complete a metering test. Also, please don't forget that the single line diagrams also need to be submitted along with the metering assessments. Now coming on to the key metering assessment questions. So these are the questions which actually determine whether a metering test is required to be performed or not. These include questions like metering location, whether it's located on the boundary or embedded within the network, whether there are multiple connections other than the actual connection used by the CMU component, whether there are any other generating units associated with other load or generation on site, and the proposed metering option A, B, and C, which is A, the settlements metering, option B is the bespoke metering, and option C is the balancing services metering. So we have noted that quite a few applicants have difficulties in answering these questions, as the understanding around these questions is not that clear. So in case you want to complete these questions and you are unsure what to answer, then you can get in touch with the delivery body or the settlements body. Coming on to my final slide. So as I said earlier, that we have just released a guidance document on the portal, to which the link is provided here as well. And the guidance document covers whether how a metering assessment can be completed using the offline tool via the EMR portal online. Also, it covers what to do when there are multiple components, because a metering assessment would need to be completed for all the components associated with the CMU, as the answers to each component might be different. We do recognize that there's a pain point with the applicants where the deadline for assessments has passed and they realize that certain questions haven't been answered correctly and what to do in these kind of situations. So we are still working on that, and we hope to release some guidance on that shortly. I've also included the link to the latest capacity market rules. if you need to refer anything. That's all from me. We have a couple of questions. Can we have a copy of the slides? Yes, the slides would be released after the webinar. And when would the slides be sent out? So, as I said, that the slides would be made available shortly after the webinar. I would now pass on to Joy, who would be covering the metering test section.
Thank you, Tushar. Hello, everyone. My name's Joy, and I'm going to go through an overview of the metering test. So what is the purpose of the metering test? Well, it's designed to determine whether your proposed metering solution is an approved metering solution. The main objectives of the test are to determine whether it's compliant with the relevant governing documents surrounding your metering, whether the net output for a generating unit is being correctly measured, and for a DSR CMU, whether the import or export of electricity to or from that CMU is also metered correctly, the overall accuracy of the metering system, and how you intend to provide this data to EMRS. So how will you know if you need to complete a metering test? As Tushar mentioned earlier, you'll need to complete the metering assessment with the delivery body. From there, they will notify you whether you need to complete a metering test. And for this to happen, you will need to complete a metering statement, which will be submitted to the EMRS. EMRS will conduct a desk-based metering test, and from there, we'll let you know whether you've been successful or unsuccessful and provide a metering certificate if you have. From there, you may be required to partake in a site audit. However, you'll be notified of this closer to the time. So as I mentioned earlier, your metering solutions will be measured against the relevant governing standards for that solution. Where you have VSC metering installed, it will be measured against the relevant codes of practice. These could be the numerical codes of practice or the alpha codes of practice, and it will be determined by the date at which your metering solution was installed. For balancing services metering, it will be measured against the relevant agreement you have with the National Grid, so this could be STORE, FCDM, or FFR. If you have bespoke metering installed, you'll need to refer to the technical requirements which are explained in Schedule 7 of the Capacity Market Rules. So once you've completed your metering statement and have completed the metering test with EMRS, how long will your certificate be valid for? The metering test certificate is valid in subsequent capacity auctions as long as your metering configuration does not change. If it does change, you'll need to notify National Grid and ESC, and you may be required to complete a new metering assessment, which may mean you need to complete the metering test again. Following the desk-based test and the issue of a certificate, you may be selected to have a site audit. If this audit identifies any non-compliances, your metering test certificate may be invalidated. I'll now pass on to Ian, who's going to explain the metering statement.
The metering statement is required where a capacity provider has been informed by the delivery body that they are required to undertake a metering test. The requirements of the metering statement are specified in Schedule 6 of the Capacity Market Rules. A link to the latest version rules is available here. EMRS have also published a guidance document, number G20, for information on completing the metering statement. Essentially, the purpose of the metering statement is to provide details about the configuration of the capacity market unit and the metering system, technical specifications of any metering equipment, certificates to prove the accuracy of the metering equipment, and evidence of commissioning to prove that the installed metering system is operating correctly and is measuring primary energy accurately. It will also confirm the method that data is provided to EMRS, either through a data collector or directly through a submission of a CSV file. Please be aware that Schedule 6 was designed to cover all aspects of every metering configuration solution, so not everything will be applicable to your metering system. If something is not applicable, the metering statement should state that this is not applicable. This is to prevent EMRS having to contact you to clarify whether you have completely filled in the metering statement. Typically, a metering statement will list every section of the Schedule 6. This is from A to R, and then will provide either an answer in that section or will specify a link to an attachment that is used as evidence for compliance with that section. So where you have evidence of meter test certificates in a separate attachment, section L of the metering statement would refer to those separate attachments. From experiences to date through the transitional arrangements and the first T-4 auction, we've identified the common areas where capacity providers have run into difficulties completing the metering statement. We've identified 7 of the most common problem areas, and we're going to go through each one of these in turn, providing a little more detail behind them to help you avoid making these common mistakes. If you seek more information on these areas and any other area of the metering statement, please refer to the guidance document G20 on the EMRS website. Firstly, taking the meter technical details, this is related to Section C of Schedule 6, and it is about the configuration and setup of half-hourly meters. You must include all meters in this section. This will include main meters and check meters where they are applicable. The reason that check meters must be included is that should the main meter become faulty, data from the check meter will be used in the capacity market, and as such, the check meter is subject to the metering test. You must also consider that you have to include all metering circuits in the CMU. So this can include auxiliary load circuits as part of a generating unit where net output is derived from multiple metering systems. The outstation ID is linked to the half-hourly meter. It is dependent on whether the meter is an integral outstation in that it records the half-hourly data, or is a separate outstation to the meter that records the half-hourly data. It is dependent on manufacturer and outstation type. Typically, this is the address used by a data collection system to be able to identify and communicate with that metering system. In a lot of modern meters, it is either the meter serial number itself or a unique PIN number used to identify that meter. Where the meter is not being dialed remotely and pulse outputs are to be used, for example, the meter serial number should be used. Where a separate outstation is used, you must include all relevant details for that outstation as well, as the outstation ID may be different from the meter outstation ID. The next problem area in this section has been the number of channels. A channel is the common term for the half-hourly data configured in the meter. So a meter can record multiple half-hourly channels for different types of energy. This question is not asking which channel is relevant to the capacity market. It has to be how the meter has been configured and set up. So if your meter was set up for active import, active export, reactive import, and reactive export half-hourly data channels, the metering statement should state that there are 4 channels. It is irrelevant that only the active export channel may be actually used for settlement in the capacity market. If in this situation that you put down 1 channel, the metering test would be failed because it does not reflect the configuration of the meter. The measurement quantity ID and the number of channels are linked. There should be a measurement quantity ID for each one of the channels that have been listed in the previous entry. The measurement quantity ID will identify what type of energy a half-hourly channel has been configured to record. I've included typical examples in modern metering of what we would expect to see. So in the previous example, where I said there was 4 channels set up in the meter, the measurement quantity IDs, there should be 4 listed, and these would be active import, active export, reactive import, and reactive export. Any mismatch between the number of channels and the reported measurement quantity IDs will result in a failed metering test. The meter multiplier is related to the physical display on the meter. This is for the cumulative energy register. Some modern meters are limited to the number of characters they can have in this display, so this could be limited to 6 characters. And to prevent the reading going round the clock in too short a period of time, some meter manufacturers use a multiplier technique to prevent this from happening. The multiplier will be displayed on the display of the meter. So in the example on the left, the meter multiplier is 10 because there is a times 10 kilowatt hour multiplier applied to the display. This is because the reading is actually 1,234,560 kilowatt hours. Where the meter is a straight read, as in the example on the right, there is no multiplier applied, and the multiplier is 1. And this is what the metering statement should state. The pulse multiplier is any multiplier that is applied by a data collection system to convert half-hourly data recorded to an energy format. So in this example, the meter half-hourly channel has recorded 5,000 pulses, and that is related to kilowatts and not kilowatt hours. The data collection system would multiply that raw pulse value by 0.5 to convert to energy, to give an energy value of 2,500 kilowatt hours. The metering statement in this instance would state that the pulse multiplier is 0.5. A lot of modern meters, the pulse multiplier is 1. This is something that should be confirmed by the installer or the manufacturer of the meter. The second area that has caused capacity providers problems is the CSV file. This is for any capacity provider that is submitting data to EMRS through a non-settlement process. So this is anything that is not a BM unit or using an MPAN. So this is a balancing services or a bespoke metering configuration solution. EMRS, to accommodate this type of metering arrangement, have defined a CSV format that should be used and submitted over SFTP. You can find more details about this CSV format and some guidance on the EMRS website in Working Practice 195, Capacity Market and CFT Metered Data. Part of this CSV file header includes an EMR party ID. This is a unique identifier for the capacity provider. You have to register with EMRS to have received your EMR party ID. Without this, the CSV file will not be compliant. To help with the commissioning part of the metering statement, a CSV file must be submitted from the date the meter commissioning and proving tests were carried out. This is used to validate the end-to-end process of meter to EMR settlement system. I will discuss more about commissioning later. Looking at the CSV file format in more detail, the first line is a header file. There will be only one header file per CSV. The 2 variable items are the EMR party ID, which I previously spoke about, and a date and time stamp that the file was created. The second line that can be seen here is a meter identifier line. The metered entity identifier can be up to 18 characters and can be chosen by the capacity provider. It must uniquely identify the metering system that the data relates to. The other variable item on that line is the settlement date. This is the date that the data relates to. So all the data in this file is for the 10th of December 2014 in this example. You can have multiple metered entity identifiers and multiple settlement dates in one CSV file. We would expect to see 48 half-hourly value periods in a CSV file unless it is one of the two clock change days. The convention is that the data is in kilowatt hours to one decimal place. A prevailing active import is a negative value. A prevailing active export value is a positive value. The last line should contain the number of lines in the CSV file. You must take care when submitting multiple metered entity identifiers and multiple settlement dates that the total for this is correct. One other thing to consider is a carried return must be present at the end of that line. So in this example, just after the 51, for it to be loaded successfully into the EMR settlement system. As part of the metering test process, we will test that this file can be loaded into the EMR settlement system. If it cannot, the metering test will be failed. The next area that has caused issues has been evidence of the installed measurement transformers. The metering statement requires you to demonstrate what ratio, accuracy class, and rated burden of any installed measurement transformers connected to the CMU meters are. This can be both current transformers and voltage transformers. The easiest way to do this is through a manufacturer's test certificate for the measurement transformer, or one of the allowed options is a photograph of the rating plate. Please be aware that if you only submit photographs of rating plates, we will use the rated accuracy class in the overall accuracy calculation, which may cause an issue proving that the metering system is within the allowed limits. I will discuss more on overall accuracy later. Looking at the example of a voltage transformer rating plate here, the information we are looking for is the ratio, which is clearly visible as 11 kV to 110 volts. The rated burden is the VA, which in this example is 50 VA, and the accuracy class of the metering winding is 0.5. You can also see the serial number of the measurement transformer. We would need something to this standard to be submitted as part of the metering statement for it to be compliant with the rules. The next problem area has been commissioning. The purpose of commissioning is to demonstrate that the metering system has been checked, to prove that it has been installed and configured correctly, and it is measuring primary energy accurately. It can be considered in two parts. Firstly, the meter, which is subdivided into the meter commissioning tests and the meter proving tests, and secondly, commissioning of the measurement transformers. Where the meter is direct connected, this is where the meter is recording primary energy directly. There are no measurement transformers. In this instance, you should state that for this particular meter used in the CMU, the measurement transformers commissioning is not applicable. Looking firstly at the commissioning of the meter. The purpose of the commissioning of the meter is to prove that the meter is operating accurately and correctly. Typically, it will confirm accuracy through measurements of voltages, currents, power, and an accuracy test against an independent energy standard used for comparison. It should confirm that the phase rotation is correct. At the time of commissioning, no alarms were present, for example, a voltage phase failure alarm. It should confirm that the programmed ratios are correct, if these are applicable to the meter. One technique to be able to do that is to measure the secondary values for the voltage and current coming into the meter and comparing that with the converted primary values in the meter. So for example, if you had a 200 to 5 amp CT ratio and you measured 5 amps on the secondary terminals coming into the meter, you would expect the meter to have converted that to a primary value of 200 amps. It is always useful to compare the meter commissioning with an independent metering system. So if there's any independent instrumentation in the substation, that should be included here as an extra validation check that the meter is recording energy correctly. The rules require that where meter commissioning and proving tests are not available, these must be redone. And as part of the CSV file submission process, we would expect to see a CSV file for the day that the commissioning and proving tests are being carried out. Ideally, commissioning and proving tests should be done at the same time. This allows the comparison and validation to be done as part of the metering test to prove that the prevailing load evidenced through the commissioning test results is matching the proving test half-hourly advance. The purpose of the proving test is to demonstrate the end-to-end process. So this is that a 30-minute period of energy recorded by the meter can be submitted accurately to EMRS as either through a data collector or directly via the CSV file. This check will confirm that the half-hourly advance at the meter matches what is received by the data collector or the settlement system. There are a number of techniques to do this. You can compare with the cumulative register advance of the meter. You can compare with a download of the half-hourly data of the meter using the meter manufacturer's software. You can compare with an independent half-hourly metering system, or where generation and demand are relatively constant, you can compare with measurements taken at the time of the commissioning. More details on these techniques are available in guidance document G20. I will go through an example using the cumulative register technique. If you were to take a meter reading, you would take it at the start of a half-hour period. So in this example, a reading was taken at 11 AM and the cumulative energy register was reading 27 kilowatt hours. You have to take a second reading at the end of that half-hour period, in this case 11:30, and the cumulative energy register has advanced to 394 kilowatt hours. The half-hourly advance is the difference between those two readings, and in this case is 367 kilowatt hours. One of the reasons that we recommend doing the commissioning at the same time as this proving test has been carried out is so that there can be a comparison with the prevailing load evidenced in the commissioning test results to validate that half-hourly advance. So in this example, if the commissioning results made reference to an independent primary indication, which can be seen on the right, and it was showing a prevailing load instantaneously of 724 kilowatts, should that have been a constant over the 30-minute period, we would expect to see around 362 kilowatt hours. This is comparable to the advance demonstrated in the cumulative register technique and helps to validate that figure. Finally, we will check that the half-hourly data presented to either data collector or EMRS matches this value. We would expect to see a half-hourly value of approximately 360 to 370 kilowatt hours. Should these values match, this part of the metering test would be passed. Turning now to the second part of the commissioning, which is the measurement transformers. Measurement transformers are installed in switchgear, which should have had, during its site acceptance testing, primary injection performed on it with a known load. This is to prove that the ratio and polarity of connected measurement transformers, this is both current and voltage transformers where applicable, is correct. Evidence of this original testing at the time of installation is acceptable to meet compliance with this part of the metering test. However, please be aware that should the ratios in the measurement transformers be multi-ratio types, so that is where you have a choice of two CT ratios perhaps, so maybe a 400, 200 to 1 amp CT, we must provide evidence to demonstrate what ratio that the meter has been connected to. Site acceptance tests can often inject both ratios and not give a clear indication of what winding has been used when it was finally connected to the meters. To help capacity providers where this testing has either never been done or the results are no longer available, ESCA and EMRS have provided alternative options by way of commissioning to demonstrate that the primary energy is being recorded correctly. More details on these can be found in guidance document G20. They can be broadly described in three high-level areas: comparison with an independent metering system, comparison of a primary and secondary measurement, proving the programmed ratio in the meter. Guidance document G20 suggests evidence that would be acceptable to EMRS for one of these alternative options, but capacity providers should agree with EMRS in advance the option to be used and what evidence they intend to submit to prevent any delays with processing the metering test where it doesn't fully comply with guidance document G20. If I take the example of one of these techniques and we were to compare against an independent metering system, the key considerations here is that the metering system used by way of comparison to the CMU metering must be independent, and you must be able to prove so. So a typical example would be an electrical schematic diagram would be submitted showing the independent metering system is connected to a different set of measurement transformers. One of the techniques that can be used is to take a photograph of the meter, clearly showing the serial number of the meter so it can be identified as the CMU meter, showing the display of the meter with a prevailing load on it. In this case, it is showing a prevailing primary energy value showing an active export of 13.6 megawatts. At approximately the same time, you will need to take a photograph of the independent measuring instrument. In this example, in another part of the substation, there is an instrumentation panel that is connected to protection CTs and VTs that is showing a value of export of 14 megawatts. These values are comparable and would be acceptable as proving that the measurement transformers have been commissioned for the CMU metering. This is not an accuracy test, and it is looking for ratio mismatches, reverse polarity, and incorrect connections. So as long as the values are approximately the same, it would be acceptable. Lastly, looking at overall accuracy. Bespoke metering and settlement metering specifies that the entire metering system must be within limits of overall accuracy. This limit is specified in the relevant governing documents. So for settlement metering, this is the codes of practice, and for bespoke metering, this is the bespoke technical requirements in Schedule 7 of the rules. As I alluded to earlier, this can cause problems where you don't have evidence of the actual errors of the metering equipment. The overall accuracy will include all metering equipment, so this can be meters, current transformers, and voltage transformers. So if we take an example where a capacity provider has provided photographs of the measurement transformer rating plates, and this is demonstrated a CT accuracy class of 0.5 and a VT accuracy class of 1, and they've only provided a certificate of conformity for the meter that confirms it is a class 1 meter. If this was used in a type 3 bespoke metering installation, individually each one of these pieces of metering equipment would be compliant with the rules. However, the overall accuracy calculation uses the rated accuracy class, and this is the figures that are used in the overall accuracy calculation. So if we used 1% for the voltage transformer, 0.5% for the current transformer, and 1% for the meter, the overall accuracy is within plus or minus 2.5%. The rules specify that the overall accuracy limit for a type 3 bespoke site is 1.5%, and in this instance the CMU would fail the metering test on overall accuracy. You do have the option of compensating the meter for any transformer errors, but you do need error certificates to be able to justify that adjustment. It is imperative that when submitting information that for at least 2 out of the 3 components of the metering equipment, you provide evidence of the actual error to ensure that you're always within the overall accuracy limits. We're just going to have we've had a question on the format and of the commissioning and proving documents. This is something that should be agreed with EMRS in advance. Typically for settlement metering, it should follow the requirements of Metering Code of Practice 4, which is available on the Alexon website. Proving documents, you have various options that you can provide photographs of the cumulative register display that are time-stamped, or you can provide evidence through a spreadsheet or as part of a commissioning test result documentation. But we would recommend that to speed up the metering test process and prevent resubmissions is that you discuss at an early stage what you intend to submit by way of commissioning and proving documentation, so that you can get acceptable evidence to EMRS first time. We will address any other questions after the webinar. I will now pass you on to Joy, who is going to talk about the metering test process.
Thank you, Ian. So Ian and Tushar have gone through the metering assessment and the metering statement. So once National Grid has notified you that you'll need to complete a metering test, you'll need to initiate your metering test by sending a request to EMRS, including your metering statement, to contacts@emrsettlement.co.uk, listing all the components that have triggered the metering test. Please include details of all the components and their metering configuration solutions in a format similar to the table. Once you've submitted your request for the test and your metering statement, EMRS has 2 working days to check that your metering statement is complete. From there, EMRS will send it to the metering agent, who has 10 working days to complete the desk-based test. Once that has been completed, the metering agent has 2 working days to notify EMRS of the results of the desk-based test, and 2 working days following that, EMRS must notify you of the failure or issue your certificate. The deadline in Rule 8.3.3, Section E, should indicate when you need to provide your certificate to the delivery body by. If you have been notified that your metering test has not passed, then you can appeal this decision, and you would need to provide a rectification plan within 15 working days of the notification that your metering test was failed. From there, you will have 40 working days, which is also from the date of notification, to complete the rectification plan. Please note these timescales and note that they all start from the metering test outcome notification. So what happens during the test? As I mentioned earlier, it's checked for completeness, and following that, we check to make sure the metering system is compliant against the relevant governing documents which I mentioned before, such as the codes of practice or the relevant balance and services agreements. We use the line diagram to check that the net output for a generating unit is measured correctly, or for a DSR CMU that the import or export of electricity to or from has been measured correctly. We also determine the overall accuracy using the information supplied in the metering statement, as Ian has just gone over, and that the metering system has been commissioned correctly. And we also check the method for submitting metered volumes. You may get more details of submitting metered volumes through Working Practice 195, which is available on the EMRS website. So how do we check the net output from the line diagram? So on the left, we have a diagram of a site which has 2 generating units and BSC settlement metering at the boundary point. One of the generators forms a CMU, whereas the other does not. The meter at the boundary point records all the electricity associated with both generating units. For this reason, this CMU is non-compliant, and that's because there is other ineligible generation on site which is being accounted for in the metered volumes at the boundary point meter. On the other hand, on the right, we have a site which has one generating unit and BSC settlement metering at the boundary, which collects the meter volumes of which are only associated to that generating unit. However, please note that the left-hand side document could be made compliant if the other generating unit, which is part of feeding tariff, was metered separately, and those meter volumes are netted from the boundary point metering to isolate the volumes associated with the CMU, which is part of the capacity market. Data submission checks. So there are various ways in which you can ensure that data is being submitted to the EMRS. Option 1 is through a settlement process, which can be BMU data or MPAN data. If you're providing data for MPANs, you may need to inform your supplier to make sure that the agreement is in place with their DA to submit the data through flows to the EMRS. If you are going with option 2, which is bespoke and Banton services meters, you will need to provide data via a non-settlement process, i.e. the CSV file. An example of the CSV file should be submitted as part of the metering statement. Please note that this CSV file should be from the date of when commissioning and proving tests were carried out for the meter. There will now be a break for questions. So we had a question on MPAN data and how you can get the DA to set up the flows to submit the data. You will need to inform your supplier to notify the DA that they need to send D0357 flows to the EMRS. Please make sure that when your supplier may change agent, that they also inform their new agent of the requirement to submit the data to the EMRS. I'll now hand over to Matthew Johnson from ESC to talk through the timescales.
Hello there, I'm Matthew Johnson from the Electricity Settlements Company, and I'm here to talk to you about timescales. On this first slide here, this identifies the regulatory deadline for applicants to submit their metering certificates to the delivery body. So for this year's auctions, for the T-4 2014 auction, we have a deadline this year of the 31st of March 2017, and for the early capacity auction and the transitional arrangement auctions, this is the 31st of August 2017. However, to allow time for EMRS and ESC to complete testing, we've actually got a submission deadline of the 31st of January 2017 in respect of the T-4 2014 auctions, and for the T-1 auctions, being the early capacity auction and this year's transitional arrangements auctions, we request that all information is submitted by the 1st of June 2017. This is in line with the timetables that we've communicated last year and from communications going out from both EMRS and ESC. As a bit of background, we expect many tests to come in, and it takes approximately 5 hours a test, so there's quite a heavy demand on our resources to complete this work. And just to highlight that any requests received after the dates given here by ESC cannot be guaranteed to be completed in time. There's some common sense advice here to make the process as productive as possible. Any retesting driven by rectification or resubmission must be completed within given timescales. Open issues won't extend the timelines beyond the regulatory deadlines. ESC encourages capacity providers to submit metering test requests and metering statements to EMRS ASAP to avoid peaks of work and enable us to turn things around as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Submission should be of a high standard to ensure efficient use of the metering test resources. Effort spent failing tests is effort that we could be using to pass tests. if a capacity provider expects to withdraw from the CM process, whether they can't meet their metering configuration or some other reasons, it would be appreciated if they could inform ESC or EMRS so resources can be redirected as required. And then obviously any capacity provider who is unable to present a metering test certificate to the delivery body will face termination. If you have any questions regarding the metering assurance process, the contact details are provided here in the back of this slide deck, and really just to say we're open for business and happy to help, so appreciate early interaction. There's been a number of reference documents that have been referred to in this presentation, and these are all hosted on the EMRS website, and I suggest having a look through these before making your submissions. Will make a big improvement to turnaround times for metering tests. Okay, I'll hand back to Ian now.
Thanks, Matt. Just to conclude, thank you all for making the time to listen to this webinar today. We will get back to you with any questions shortly if we weren't able to answer your question during the webinar. We'll also be sending a link to the recording of this webinar. There will also be links on the EMRS website to it, and it will be available on YouTube. Thank you again for listening.